The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her grip on the M9 pistol. Her hands, steady despite the early hour chill, held the weapon with practiced confidence. Around her, fellow recruits struggled with their own firearms, some fumbling with magazines, others squinting through iron sights with uncertainty etched across their faces. Sarah had grown up in the mountains of Colorado, where her father taught her to shoot cans off fence posts before she could properly tie her shoes. The smell of gunpowder and the sharp crack of rifle fire were as familiar to her as morning coffee. When she enlisted in the Army at 19, she brought with her an intuitive understanding of ballistics that most soldiers spent years trying to develop. The drill sergeant, a weathered man named Rodriguez who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, walked the line of recruits with his characteristic stern expression. His eyes moved methodically from soldier to soldier, noting form, breathing, and stance. When he reached Sarah, he paused longer than usual. Her shooting stance was textbook perfect, but, more than that, there was something in the way she handled the weapon that caught his attention. "Mitchell," he called out, his voice carrying across the range. "Show me what you can do with that sidearm." Sarah stepped forward to the firing line, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. The target downrange stood 50 meters away, a standard silhouette that most recruits struggled to hit consistently at half that distance. She raised the M9, her breathing automatically falling into the rhythm her father had taught her years ago. Inhale, half exhale, hold, squeeze. The first shot rang out, followed immediately by 4 more in rapid succession. Through the spotting scope, Rodriguez watched 5 holes appear in the target's center mass, clustered so tightly they could have been covered by a silver dollar. The other recruits fell silent, their own weapons lowering as they turned to stare. Again, Rodriguez commanded, replacing the target with a fresh one. Sarah repeated the exercise, this time at 75 meters. Again, the shots grouped impossibly tight, each bullet finding its mark with mechanical precision. By the third target, word had spread through the training company. Other drill sergeants had gathered to watch, along with several officers who happened to be passing by. Captain Williams, the company commander, approached Rodriguez with raised eyebrows. "How long has she been shooting like that?" "Since day one, sir," Rodriguez replied, still watching Sarah through his binoculars. "Never seen anything quite like it. She makes the M9 sing like it was made for her hands." What made Sarah's shooting even more remarkable was her consistency under pressure. During stress fire exercises, when recruits had to shoot after running obstacle courses or while drill sergeants shouted in their ears, most soldiers saw their accuracy plummet. Sarah's groups actually tightened. The more chaotic the situation, the more focused she became. 3 weeks into basic training, Sarah found herself called to the company headquarters. Captain Williams sat behind his desk, her training records spread before him. Across from him sat a woman in dress uniform with major's insignia, someone Sarah had never seen before. "Private Mitchell," the captain began, "this is Major Chen from the marksmanship unit. She's here to observe some of our more promising shooters." Major Chen leaned forward slightly. "I've been reviewing your scores, Mitchell. 98% accuracy with the M9, even under stress conditions. That's exceptional for someone with your limited formal training. Tell me about your background." Sarah straightened in her chair. "My father was a hunter and competitive shooter, ma'am. He started teaching me when I was 7. We'd practice almost every weekend in the mountains behind our house." "What kind of distances?" Major Chen asked. "Started with 20 yards for handgun work, ma'am. By the time I was 15, I was consistently hitting targets at 150 yards with a pistol. Rifle work went out much further." Major Chen exchanged a glance with Captain Williams. "Private, how would you feel about some additional training opportunities? There are specialized units that could benefit from someone with your particular skills." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She had joined the army hoping for exactly this kind of opportunity, though she hadn't dared voice it during the recruitment process. "I'd be honored, ma'am." The conversation that followed would change the trajectory of Sarah's military career. Major Chen explained that the Army was looking for soldiers who could excel in precision shooting roles, particularly in urban environments where civilian safety was paramount. The margin for error in such situations was essentially zero, requiring shooters who could perform under extreme pressure with absolute accuracy. "There's a selection process," Major Chen continued. "It's demanding, both physically and mentally. Many candidates wash out, regardless of their shooting ability." "Are you interested?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied without hesitation. 2 months later, Sarah found herself at Fort Benning, Georgia, beginning what would become one of the most challenging periods of her life. The selection process for the specialized marksmanship program was designed to break candidates, to find those rare individuals who could maintain their skills under the worst possible conditions. The training began before dawn each day with physical conditioning that pushed every recruit to their limits. Miles of running in full gear, obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone with a sadistic imagination, and hand-to-hand combat training that left everyone bruised and exhausted. But it was the mental challenges that proved most difficult for many candidates. Sleep deprivation exercises pushed recruits to function on 2 or 3 hours of rest per night for days at a time, then tested their shooting accuracy when their minds were clouded with fatigue. Stress inoculation training placed them in scenarios with explosions, smoke, and chaos while requiring them to identify and engage specific targets without harming civilians. Sarah discovered that her mountain upbringing had prepared her for more than just shooting. Growing up in an environment where a misplaced step could mean a dangerous fall had taught her to remain calm under pressure. The countless hours she had spent tracking deer through difficult terrain had developed her patience and observation skills. Most importantly, her father's emphasis on safety had ingrained in her an absolute respect for the responsibility that came with holding a weapon. 3 weeks into the program, Sarah faced her most difficult challenge yet. The instructors had constructed a mock urban environment, complete with multi-story buildings, narrow alleys, and numerous civilian targets mixed among legitimate threats. Candidates had to navigate through the environment while under simulated fire, identifying and engaging enemy targets while ensuring no harm came to non-combatants. Many of the other candidates struggled with the scenario's complexity. The pressure to move quickly conflicted with the need for careful target identification. Several promising shooters were eliminated when they either failed to engage legitimate threats or, worse, accidentally engaged civilian targets. Sarah approached the exercise with methodical patience. While other candidates rushed through the course, she moved deliberately, taking the time to properly identify each target before engaging. Her shots were fewer than those of her competitors, but each one found its mark precisely. When the exercise ended, she had achieved a perfect score, all enemy targets neutralized, 0 civilian casualties. Instructor Williams, a grizzled sergeant first class who had seen 3 combat deployments, approached Sarah as she cleared her weapon. "Mitchell, that was textbook perfect. How did you maintain that level of precision under time pressure?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sergeant, my father always told me that in shooting, slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. Rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes with a weapon can be permanent." As the weeks progressed, Sarah's reputation within the program grew. Other candidates began seeking her advice, asking about breathing techniques, sight alignment, and mental preparation. She shared what she could, remembering her father's belief that knowledge improved when shared. The final exercise of the selection process was designed to test every skill the candidates had developed. They would be placed in a scenario that simulated a hostage rescue situation, with multiple shooters working as a team to neutralize threats while protecting innocent lives. The margin for error was 0, a single mistake could result in the simulated death of a hostage and immediate elimination from the program. Sarah found herself paired with Jake Peterson, a former police officer from Texas whose steady nerves had carried him through the program alongside her. Together, they studied the scenario briefing, identifying potential shooting positions and coordinating their fields of fire to ensure complete coverage of the target area. The exercise began at midnight, adding the challenge of low-light conditions to an already complex situation. Sarah and Jake moved through the darkened building like shadows, communicating with hand signals and suppressed whispers. Through her night vision equipment, Sarah could see the heat signatures of both hostages and hostage-takers, but distinguishing between them required careful observation and perfect timing. The first engagement came on the building's 2nd floor. A terrorist holding an AK-47 stood partially concealed behind a concrete pillar, with a civilian crouched just 3 feet to his left. The shot required precise placement to neutralize the threat without endangering the innocent person nearby. Sarah settled into a prone position, her M9 steady in her hands. The distance was 45 meters, challenging for a pistol shot under ideal conditions, nearly impossible in darkness with a human life hanging in the balance. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate slow, and squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure her father had taught her to use on mountain game 20 years earlier. The simulated round found its mark perfectly, and the terrorist target dropped. The civilian remained unharmed. Jake gave her a thumbs up, and they continued deeper into the building. The scenario continued for another 30 minutes, presenting increasingly difficult challenges. Multiple shooters required coordinated engagement to prevent them from harming hostages. Moving targets tested their ability to lead shots accurately. Tight quarters demanded shots that threaded between innocent bystanders to find their intended targets. Through it all, Sarah's shooting remained flawless. Each shot she fired found its intended mark with surgical precision. When the exercise concluded, she and Jake had achieved something remarkable, a perfect mission outcome with 0 civilian casualties and all threats neutralized. As the candidates gathered for the final debrief, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From shooting cans in the Colorado mountains to executing precision shots in simulated combat, every step had prepared her for this achievement. But she also understood that this was just the beginning. The real test would come when lives truly hung in the balance, when the targets weren't simulations but real enemies who could shoot back. Major Chen approached the successful candidates with a mixture of pride and solemnity in her expression. "You've all demonstrated exceptional skill and dedication. But I want you to understand something clearly: the training you've completed here is just the foundation. In the field, you'll face challenges we can't fully replicate in training. The responsibility you'll carry is enormous." Sarah listened intently, understanding the weight of the major's words. She thought about her father's lessons, not just about shooting, but about responsibility, patience, and the importance of making every shot count. These principles would guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The ceremony that followed was simple but meaningful. Each successful candidate received their qualification badge and assignment orders. Sarah's orders directed her to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where she would join an elite unit preparing for deployment to a region where precision shooting could mean the difference between mission success and civilian casualties. As she packed her belongings that evening, Sarah called her father to share the news. His voice carried obvious pride, but also concern for the dangers she would face. "Remember what I taught you," he said before ending the call. "Every shot matters. Make them count." Sarah promised she would, not knowing that within months, she would face a situation that would test every skill she had learned and every principle her father had taught her. The enemy would force her to lower her preferred weapon, but her precision would make them pay dearly for every step they took toward their objectives. The transport helicopter's rotor wash kicked up clouds of fine sand as Sarah Mitchell stepped onto the landing zone at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The desert air hit her like opening an oven door, dry and scorching despite the early morning hour. Around her, other members of Bravo Company shouldered their gear and moved toward the reception area, their eyes already scanning the horizon with the wariness that came from knowing they were now in hostile territory. Sarah adjusted her equipment load, feeling the familiar weight of her M9 pistol secured in its holster. After 6 months at Fort Campbell, she had been assigned to a reconnaissance platoon that specialized in precision engagement missions. Her reputation as an exceptional marksman had preceded her, and Lieutenant Colonel Barnes had personally requested her transfer to his unit before their deployment to Afghanistan. The briefing room at FOB Phoenix was sparse, containing only folding chairs, a projector, and maps covering every wall. As Sarah took her seat among the 24 other soldiers of her platoon, she studied the terrain features marked on the detailed charts. The area of operations stretched across mountainous terrain that reminded her of home, but the strategic situation was far more complex than anything she had encountered in Colorado. Captain Rodriguez, a compact man with intense dark eyes, stood before the assembled soldiers. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kunar province. This area has been a hotbed of insurgent activity for the past 8 years. Our mission is to disrupt enemy supply lines and provide intelligence on their movement patterns through this region. He pointed to a series of valleys marked on the map. The enemy has been using these corridors to move weapons and personnel between Pakistan and the more populated areas to the south. Previous attempts to interdict these movements have been unsuccessful because the insurgents have scouts positioned on every ridgeline. They see our conventional forces coming from miles away. Sarah leaned forward, studying the terrain more carefully. The valleys were narrow, with steep sides that provided numerous concealment positions. Any force moving through them would be channeled into predictable routes, making them vulnerable to well-positioned marksmen. That's where we come in, Captain Rodriguez continued. Our unit will establish observation posts on key terrain features. We'll gather intelligence on enemy movements and, when appropriate, engage high-value targets with precision fire. The goal is to make the enemy pay a price for every step they take through our area of responsibility. The following weeks blurred together in a routine of preparation and initial reconnaissance missions. Sarah's team, led by Staff Sergeant Williams, conducted numerous patrols to familiarize themselves with the terrain and establish potential shooting positions. The mountains were even more challenging than they had appeared on the maps, with loose rock that could trigger devastating avalanches and weather that could change from blazing heat to freezing cold within hours. During these initial operations, Sarah began to understand the unique challenges of her environment. The thin air at altitude affected bullet trajectory in ways that required constant calculation and adjustment. Wind patterns in the mountain valleys were unpredictable, swirling and shifting in response to temperature changes and terrain features. Most significantly, the enemy was far more skilled and determined than any she had faced in training scenarios. 3 weeks into their deployment, Sarah's team received their first real mission. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target, an insurgent leader responsible for numerous attacks on coalition forces, would be moving through their sector within the next 48 hours. The team was tasked with establishing an observation post and eliminating the target if the opportunity presented itself. The insertion required a night movement through treacherous terrain to reach a ridgeline position that overlooked the suspected route. Sarah's team moved in single file, using night vision equipment to navigate the rocky slopes while maintaining noise discipline that would have impressed her father's hunting companions. By dawn, they had established their position in a cluster of boulders that provided excellent concealment and clear fields of fire over the valley below. The waiting began, a test of patience that separated professional soldiers from amateurs. Sarah settled into her position, her M9 ready and her spotting scope focused on the trail network below. Hours passed without movement. The sun climbed higher, turning their rocky hide into an oven that tested their endurance and concentration. Sarah sipped water sparingly, knowing that their resupply wouldn't come for several days. Around midday, when the heat was becoming almost unbearable, Staff Sergeant Williams spotted movement through his binoculars. "Contact," he whispered into his radio. "Approximately 8 individuals moving north along Trail Charlie. Positive identification pending." Sarah adjusted her scope, focusing on the distant figures. Even at extreme range, she could see that they were armed and moving with the tactical discipline of experienced fighters. Through her optics, she identified AK-47 rifles, rocket-propelled grenade launchers, and what appeared to be a heavy machine gun broken down for transport. Target identification confirmed, Williams continued his radio transmission. "This is the package we're looking for." The insurgent column was moving approximately 600 meters away, well within range for Sarah's precision shooting but presenting a complex engagement scenario. The enemy fighters were spaced apart and using available cover effectively. More challenging still, intelligence reports suggested that local civilians sometimes used the same trails, requiring positive identification before any engagement. Sarah studied each target carefully through her scope, noting their weapons, equipment, and movement patterns. These were clearly experienced fighters, not civilians caught in the wrong place. But the engagement would require perfect timing and flawless execution to prevent any enemy fighter from escaping to warn others in the area. "Sarah," Williams whispered, "you have the longest range capability. I need you to take the lead fighter when I give the command. Peterson and Martinez will engage the machine gun team. Johnson and Smith will handle the rear guard. Questions?" Sarah adjusted her position slightly, ensuring her M9 was perfectly stable. The distance was at the extreme edge of effective pistol range, requiring her to compensate for bullet drop and wind drift with mathematical precision. She calculated the adjustments automatically, her mind running through the ballistic formulas her father had taught her years ago. The enemy column continued its movement, unaware that death was watching from the ridgeline above. Sarah controlled her breathing, letting her heart rate slow as she had learned during countless hours of practice. The lead fighter moved with confidence, clearly comfortable in terrain he had traveled many times before. "Stand by," Williams whispered. Sarah's finger found the trigger, applying just enough pressure to take up the slack without firing. The shot would need to be perfect, not just to eliminate the target, but to ensure that the follow-up engagements could proceed without the enemy having time to establish defensive positions. Execute! Sarah's shot broke with the clean precision of a glass rod snapping. 600 meters away, the enemy leader dropped immediately, his AK-47 clattering across the rocky trail. The sound of the shot echoed through the valley as her teammates engaged their assigned targets with their rifles. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds, but, in that brief time, Sarah's team had eliminated 7 enemy fighters and captured a significant cache of weapons and intelligence materials. The 8th fighter managed to escape into the dense vegetation, but not before Sarah had put 2 rounds into the rocky outcrop just inches from his position, demonstrating the futility of remaining in the area. As the team conducted a post-engagement assessment, Staff Sergeant Williams examined Sarah's target through his binoculars. The shot had been perfect, striking center mass despite the extreme range and challenging conditions. "Outstanding shooting, Mitchell," he said quietly. "That was a hell of a shot for a pistol." Sarah nodded her acknowledgement, but her mind was already processing the engagement for lessons learned. The enemy had moved with discipline and tactical awareness that suggested extensive training and experience. More concerning, their equipment included communications gear that indicated they were part of a larger, well-organized network. The intelligence gathered from the engagement painted a disturbing picture. Documents recovered from the enemy fighters indicated that a major operation was being planned, one that would involve significantly more insurgent forces than typically operated in the area. Sarah's team had stumbled upon what appeared to be an advance reconnaissance element for a much larger force. Captain Rodriguez's reaction to their report was immediate and serious. "Based on this intelligence, we're looking at a company-sized enemy force moving into our area of operations within the next week. Their objective appears to be the establishment of a permanent base camp in the mountain region." He spread additional maps across the briefing table, showing terrain features and potential routes the enemy might use. If they succeed in establishing this base, they'll be able to launch attacks throughout the region while maintaining a secure fallback position. "We cannot allow that to happen." The mission parameters changed dramatically. Instead of conducting occasional precision engagements against small groups, Sarah's unit would need to conduct a sustained campaign against a much larger and better organized enemy force. The stakes had risen considerably, and failure was not an option. Sarah spent the following days studying the terrain with renewed intensity, identifying potential shooting positions and calculating ranges to key terrain features. She cleaned and inspected her M9 repeatedly, ensuring that every component was functioning perfectly. Most importantly, she mentally prepared herself for the sustained combat operations that lay ahead. The enemy's increased presence became evident within days. Reconnaissance drones spotted movement in areas that had previously been quiet. Radio intercepts revealed increased communications traffic in languages and codes that intelligence specialists worked around the clock to decipher. Most ominously, local civilian populations began evacuating the area, suggesting they had advance warning of what was coming. Sarah's team received orders to establish a permanent observation post on the highest peak in their sector, a position that would provide commanding views of multiple valleys but would also make them visible to enemy forces equipped with their own optics. The position would be dangerous but essential for the intelligence gathering and precision engagement mission that lay ahead. The movement to the new position required 3 days of careful approach, using routes that would minimize their exposure to enemy observation. Sarah carried extra ammunition for her M9, understanding that the upcoming operations might require more sustained engagement than their previous missions. As they established their new hide, Sarah tested range cards to every prominent terrain feature within her effective engagement envelope. The position provided excellent fields of fire, but it also made them the most forward element in the sector. They would likely be the first to make contact with the advancing enemy forces. On their third night in the new position, Sarah's worst fears were realized. Through her night vision equipment, she spotted a large group of armed figures moving up the valley toward their position. This wasn't a small reconnaissance element or a supply convoy. This was an assault force, and they were coming directly towards Sarah's team. "Contact front," Williams whispered into his radio. "Approximately 40 enemy fighters approaching our position. Request immediate support." The response crackled back through their communications equipment: "Support is en route but will not arrive for 30 minutes. You are authorized to engage at your discretion." Sarah settled into her shooting position, knowing that the next 30 minutes would test every skill she had developed and every lesson her father had taught her. The enemy was approaching with overwhelming numbers, but her precision could make them pay dearly for every step they took up the mountain. The battle for the high ground was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell would make every shot count. The enemy force moved up the mountainside like a dark tide, their silhouettes barely visible against the rocky terrain even through Sarah's night vision equipment. She counted at least 40 fighters, possibly more, armed with a mixture of AK-47 rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and what appeared to be at least 2 heavy machine guns. They moved with the confidence of fighters who believed they had numerical superiority and the element of surprise. Sarah's team of 5 soldiers occupied a position that would have been defensible against a small force, but against 40 experienced insurgents, their situation bordered on desperate. The rocky outcrop provided good concealment and excellent fields of fire, but it also left them with limited routes of escape if the position became untenable. Staff Sergeant Williams coordinated their defensive preparations with calm efficiency despite the overwhelming odds. "Martinez, you and Johnson cover the eastern approach with the saw. Peterson, take the western flank with your rifle. Sarah, I need you on precision targets, leaders, machine gunners, anyone with special equipment." Sarah adjusted her position to maximize her field of fire while maintaining the concealment that might keep her alive through the coming engagement. Her M9 was loaded with a fresh magazine, and she had 4 additional magazines readily accessible. At the ranges she would be engaging, each shot would need to count not just for accuracy, but for ammunition conservation. The enemy force split into 3 columns as they approached, clearly intending to assault the position from multiple directions simultaneously. Sarah watched through her scope as leaders moved among the fighters, pointing toward different approach routes and coordinating the attack. These were the targets she needed to eliminate first. Without leadership and coordination, the larger force would be far less effective. 200 meters and, closing, Williams whispered into his radio. Still no sign of air support. Sarah identified her first target, an insurgent leader who was directing one of the assault columns with hand signals and whispered commands. The man carried an AK-47 but also had radio equipment and what appeared to be night vision optics, clearly a senior figure in the attacking force. The range was 150 meters, challenging for a pistol shot but well within Sarah's capabilities. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate slow, and waited for the perfect moment. The target paused behind a boulder to observe her team's position, exposing his upper torso for several seconds. Sarah's finger found the trigger, taking up the slack with practiced precision. The shot broke cleanly, and the enemy leader dropped immediately. His radio clattered against the rocks as he fell, the sound echoing through the valley like a death knell for the coordinated assault. The fighters around him hesitated, looking for direction that would no longer come. "Nice shot," Peterson whispered from his position. "They're confused already." But Sarah was already shifting to her next target. A machine gunner was setting up a heavy weapon position that would dominate their defensive position if allowed to complete his preparations. The range was slightly longer, nearly 200 meters, but the target was partially illuminated by starlight reflecting off the metallic components of his weapon. Sarah's second shot found its mark with the same deadly precision as the first. The machine gunner slumped over his weapon, and the fighters attempting to assist him scattered for cover. 2 well-placed shots had already begun to disrupt the enemy's carefully planned assault.
The insurgents' response was immediate and violent. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, tracers lighting the darkness as bullets sparked off the rocks around Sarah's team.
The volume of fire was overwhelming, forcing all 5 defenders to press themselves against whatever cover they could find. Williams keyed his radio between bursts of incoming fire,
taking heavy contact from approximately 40 enemy fighters. Request immediate air support and artillery fire mission.
The response was not encouraging. Air support is inbound but delayed by weather. Artillery is available but danger close to your position.
Can you mark targets with laser?
Sarah realized that their survival would depend on their own skills and ammunition rather than outside support. She shifted position slightly to gain a better angle on the enemy fighters while staying behind the protective cover of the boulder formation. The enemy was advancing by bounds, with some fighters providing covering fire while others moved to closer positions. It was a professional military tactic that suggested these insurgents had received formal training, possibly from foreign advisors or former military personnel. Through her scope, Sarah identified another high-value target, an insurgent carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher.
If that weapon found its target, their rocky defensive position could become a death trap within seconds.
The fighter was approximately 175 meters away, moving in short rushes between available cover. Sarah waited for the fighter to pause behind a large boulder, knowing he would eventually have to expose himself to aim and fire the RPG. When the moment came, she was ready. Her third shot of the engagement struck the RPG gunner in the center of mass, eliminating both the target and the immediate threat to her team's position. The loss of 3 key fighters in rapid succession was having a visible effect on the enemy force. Their assault was losing momentum as subordinate leaders struggled to fill the gaps left by fallen commanders. But 40 fighters, even disorganized ones, still represented overwhelming firepower against 5 defenders.
Martinez's squad automatic weapon chattered from the eastern flank, laying down suppressive fire against a group of insurgents who were attempting to flank their position.
The distinctive sound of the American weapon was answered by a storm of AK-47 fire that chipped fragments from the rocks around his position. Running low on ammo for the SAW, Martinez called out during a brief lull in the firing.
Sarah realized that ammunition conservation would become critical if the engagement continued much longer.
She had already expended 3 rounds from her first magazine, leaving her with 37 rounds total for what could be a prolonged firefight.
Each shot would need to achieve maximum effect.
The enemy was learning to respect her precision shooting, keeping their movements short and using available cover more effectively. But this caution was actually working to Sarah's advantage, slowing their advance and providing more opportunities for carefully aimed shots. A new threat emerged as Sarah spotted muzzle flashes from a position higher up the mountain. The enemy had managed to get fighters above their position, creating a crossfire that would be devastating if not addressed immediately. The elevated position was approximately 250 meters away, at the extreme edge of effective pistol range.
Sarah adjusted her aim point to compensate for the increased distance and elevation difference.
The target was partially concealed behind rocks, with only brief exposures as he fired down at her team. She would have one chance when he next exposed himself to engage. The opportunity came as the enemy fighter leaned out to fire a burst from his AK-47.
Sarah's shot crossed the intervening space in less than a second, striking the target and eliminating the elevated threat.
Her teammates looked at her with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. A 250-meter shot with a pistol, at night, under combat conditions, was beyond what most soldiers would consider possible.
"How the hell did you make that shot?"
Johnson called out from his position. Sarah was already scanning for her next target, her mind focused entirely on the tactical situation. "Lucky," she replied, though luck had nothing to do with the countless hours of practice and the mathematical precision with which she calculated each shot. The enemy force was regrouping after losing several key personnel, but they were also adapting their tactics. Instead of attempting to assault the position directly, they began establishing firing positions at longer ranges, intending to pin down the defenders while other fighters maneuvered to assault positions.
This change in tactics actually worked to Sarah's advantage.
The longer ranges reduced the effectiveness of the enemy's automatic weapons while keeping their targets within her effective engagement envelope. She began engaging systematically, picking off fighters who exposed themselves while moving between positions. Her fifth shot eliminated an insurgent who was attempting to set up another machine gun position. Her sixth shot struck a fighter who was directing the movement of others with hand signals. Each shot was precisely placed, and each shot removed a key component of the enemy force's combat effectiveness. But the ammunition situation was becoming critical. Sarah had fired 6 rounds from her first magazine, leaving her with 29 rounds total. The enemy still numbered more than 30 fighters, and their assault showed no signs of ending.
Williams must have been thinking along the same lines.
He keyed his radio again, request immediate resupply of ammunition.
We cannot sustain this engagement much longer without support.
The radio response was encouraging. Helicopter is inbound with ammunition resupply and medical evacuation capability.
ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes might as well have been 12 hours in their current situation.
The enemy was maintaining constant pressure, and Sarah's team was expending ammunition faster than they could afford. But the knowledge that help was coming provided a psychological boost that was almost as important as the promised supplies. Sarah continued her methodical engagement of enemy targets, making each shot count with surgical precision. Her 7th shot eliminated a fighter who was attempting to direct mortar fire against their position. Her 8th shot struck an insurgent who was providing covering fire for a flanking movement. The enemy began to show signs of frustration with their inability to advance against such accurate defensive fire. Their movements became less coordinated, and some fighters began firing wildly rather than taking careful aim. This loss of fire discipline worked to Sarah's advantage, making them easier targets while reducing the effectiveness of their return fire. Peterson's rifle cracked from the western flank, adding to the defensive firepower with his own precision shooting. Though not as accurate as Sarah at extreme ranges, he was an excellent marksman who could hit targets reliably out to 400 meters.
Getting some good shots from this angle, he reported. They're definitely feeling the pressure.
Sarah shifted her attention to a new group of fighters who were attempting to use a dry creek bed as a covered approach route. The natural terrain feature would allow them to advance much closer to the defensive position without exposure to effective fire. She needed to stop this flanking attempt before it gained momentum. The first insurgent to expose himself as he moved up the creek bed became her 9th target. The shot was complicated by the need to calculate the angle of fire into the depression, but Sarah's understanding of ballistics served her well. The target dropped immediately, and the fighters behind him sought cover.
Sarah's 10th shot caught another insurgent as he attempted to continue the flanking movement.
The precision of her shooting was making it clear to the enemy that the natural terrain feature was no longer a safe approach route. The sound of helicopter rotors began to echo through the valley, still distant but growing stronger. The promised support was approaching, and Sarah's team just needed to hold their position for a few more minutes. But the enemy had also heard the approaching aircraft, and they were making a desperate final assault before air support could arrive. Fighters emerged from cover all along the front, rushing toward the defensive position with the reckless courage of men who knew their opportunity was slipping away. Sarah's rate of fire increased to match the urgency of the situation. Her 11th shot dropped a fighter at 100 meters. Her 12th shot eliminated another at slightly longer range. But there were still too many targets advancing too quickly for one pistol, no matter how accurately fired, to stop them all. The defensive position erupted in the rapid fire of multiple weapons as all 5 defenders engaged the final assault.
Martinez's squad automatic weapon swept the approaching fighters with devastating effect.
Peterson and Johnson added their rifle fire to the storm of bullets. Williams coordinated the defense while contributing his own accurate marksmanship. Through the chaos of the final firefight, Sarah continued her precision engagement of key targets. Her 13th shot eliminated the leader of the assault. Her 14th shot struck a fighter carrying demolition charges that could have destroyed their position. The helicopter appeared over the ridgeline just as the enemy assault reached its climax. The aircraft's door gunners added their firepower to the defensive effort, raking the mountainside with machine gun fire that broke the back of the insurgent attack. Within minutes, the surviving enemy fighters were retreating down the mountain, leaving behind nearly 20 dead and wounded. Sarah's precision shooting had been the key factor in their successful defense, eliminating leadership and heavy weapons that could have made the difference between victory and disaster. As the ammunition resupply was completed and wounded enemy prisoners were evacuated for medical treatment and interrogation, Sarah reflected on the engagement. She had fired 14 rounds from her M9 pistol and achieved 14 hits at ranges that most soldiers would consider impossible for a sidearm. But, more importantly, each shot had achieved its intended tactical effect. She had not simply hit targets, she had systematically dismantled the enemy force's capability to conduct an effective assault. The precision that her father had taught her in the Colorado mountains had proven decisive in a life-and-death struggle halfway around the world. The battle was over, but Sarah knew that the war was far from finished. The enemy would learn from this engagement and adapt their tactics accordingly. She would need to be ready for whatever challenges they presented next. 3 days after the mountain siege, Sarah Mitchell found herself in the most challenging situation of her military career. Intelligence reports indicated that the surviving enemy fighters had regrouped and were planning a coordinated attack on forward operating Base Phoenix itself. Worse still, they had received reinforcements from across the border, bringing their total strength to over 100 fighters equipped with heavy weapons and suicide vests. The base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, gathered his senior staff and squad leaders for an emergency briefing. The intelligence picture painted a grim scenario. The enemy planned to assault the base from 3 directions simultaneously, using diversionary attacks to draw defenders away from the main assault route. "They're not just trying to inflict casualties," Barnes explained, pointing to reconnaissance photos spread across the briefing table. "Their objective is to overrun the base completely and capture equipment, weapons, and prisoners. This is an all-or-nothing assault designed to achieve maximum propaganda value." Sarah studied the terrain around the base, identifying potential shooting positions and calculating ranges to likely enemy approach routes. The base's defensive perimeter was well constructed, but it was designed to withstand small-scale attacks, not a coordinated assault by over 100 determined fighters. Captain Rodriguez approached Sarah after the briefing. "Mitchell, I need your honest assessment. Given what you've observed about these fighters' capabilities, what are our chances of holding the base with our current defensive setup?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sir, they've learned to respect precision shooting, but they've also learned to adapt. They'll use overwhelming numbers, diversionary attacks, and probably suicide bombers to breach our perimeter. We need to make them pay such a high price for their advance that they can't sustain the assault. What do you recommend?" "Mobile defense," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Instead of fixed positions that they can target with heavy weapons, we use small teams to engage them at maximum range and, then, displace before they can respond effectively. Make them fight for every meter of ground." Barnes approved the mobile defense plan, and Sarah found herself assigned to lead a 3-person precision engagement team that would operate outside the main defensive perimeter. Their mission was to identify and eliminate key enemy personnel while the main force attempted their assault. Sarah's team consisted of herself, Sergeant Martinez with his squad automatic weapon, and Corpsman Johnson with his medical training and additional communications equipment. They would establish a hide position on the high ground overlooking the most likely enemy approach route, engaging targets of opportunity while providing real-time intelligence to the base defenders. The team moved out under cover of darkness, using night vision equipment to navigate to their position without being detected by enemy scouts. The hide they selected provided excellent observation and fields of fire while offering multiple escape routes if their position became compromised. As dawn broke over the mountainous terrain, Sarah's team began to observe increased enemy activity in the valleys below. Through her spotting scope, she could see fighters moving equipment and establishing staging areas for their planned assault. The level of organization and preparation was impressive and deeply concerning. "Contact," Johnson whispered into his radio. "Approximately 60 enemy fighters visible in the assembly area. Heavy weapons include mortars, machine guns, and what appears to be a recoilless rifle." The response from base command was immediate: engage targets of opportunity. Priority on heavy weapons and leadership personnel. Sarah identified her first target, an insurgent leader who was directing the placement of a heavy machine gun position. The range was 320 meters, requiring precise calculation of bullet drop and wind drift. She made the necessary adjustments to her sight picture and waited for the optimal moment. The enemy leader paused in his movements to observe the base through binoculars, presenting a stationary target for several seconds. Sarah's shot crossed the intervening space with mathematical precision, eliminating the target and immediately disrupting the machine gun team's preparations. The sound of the shot echoed through the valley, alerting the enemy force to the presence of precision shooters on the high ground. But, rather than taking cover, they accelerated their preparations, understanding that time was now working against them. Sarah's second shot eliminated the machine gunner who had been attempting to continue setting up the heavy weapon position. The loss of 2 key personnel in rapid succession created visible confusion among the enemy fighters, but they continued their assault preparations with grim determination. Martinez engaged a group of fighters who were attempting to set up a mortar position with suppressive fire from his squad automatic weapon. The accurate fire forced them to abandon their equipment and seek cover, but Sarah knew they would return once the immediate threat was neutralized. Through her scope, Sarah observed an enemy fighter handling what appeared to be a suicide vest, preparing for what would likely be a breach assault against the base's main gate. This target took priority over all others. If the suicide bomber reached the perimeter, the resulting explosion could create a gap that would be impossible to defend. The target was moving constantly, making the shot extremely difficult even at the relatively short range of 250 meters. Sarah tracked his movement through her scope, calculating the lead necessary to intercept him during one of his brief pauses. When the moment came, her shot was perfect, eliminating the suicide bomber before he could approach the base perimeter. "Suicide bomber neutralized," she reported through her radio. Multiple additional threats identified. The enemy force was beginning to advance despite the casualties they had suffered from precision shooting. Their tactics had evolved to include better use of cover and concealment, making target identification more challenging. But Sarah noticed something important: they were maintaining their assault formation despite taking casualties from an unknown source, suggesting their commanders had ordered them to continue regardless of losses. This presented both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity was that predictable movement patterns made it easier to anticipate targets. The challenge was that the enemy was willing to accept significant casualties to achieve their objectives, meaning they would continue advancing even under accurate fire. Sarah's fourth shot eliminated an enemy fighter who was carrying additional suicide vests toward the base perimeter. Her fifth shot struck a mortar gunner who had resumed his attempts to establish an indirect fire position. Each shot was removing a specific capability from the enemy force while contributing to their overall loss of combat effectiveness. But the enemy was learning from each engagement. They began using smoke grenades to obscure Sarah's fields of fire, forcing her to relocate her position to maintain effectiveness. The movement was dangerous, exposing her team to potential observation and counterfire, but it was necessary to continue their mission. From their new position, Sarah could observe the enemy force splitting into multiple assault columns, confirming the intelligence reports about a multi-directional attack. The main assault would come from the east, but diversionary attacks from the north and south would attempt to draw defenders away from the primary threat. "Base Command, this is Overwatch," Johnson reported their observations. "Confirm multiple assault columns. Primary threat from the east with approximately 40 fighters. Secondary threats from north and south with 20 fighters each." The response indicated that the base defenders were repositioning to meet the multiple threats, but Sarah knew that dividing their defensive strength made each position more vulnerable to being overwhelmed by concentrated attack. Sarah focused her attention on the primary assault column, identifying key personnel and heavy weapons that needed to be eliminated before they could reach effective range of the base perimeter. Through her scope, she spotted an insurgent carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, a weapon that could devastate the base's defensive positions if employed effectively. The RPG gunner was moving with tactical discipline, using available cover and coordinating with other fighters to provide mutual support. Sarah would need to time her shot perfectly to catch him during one of his brief exposures between covered positions. The opportunity came as the fighter paused to coordinate with the assault team leader. Sarah's sixth shot eliminated the RPG threat, sending a clear message to the enemy force that their heavy weapons were being systematically targeted by precision fire. The enemy response was immediate and concerning. Instead of seeking cover or slowing their advance, they began moving at a rapid pace toward the base perimeter, accepting casualties in exchange for reducing their exposure time to precision shooting. This suggested a level of tactical sophistication and determination that made them extremely dangerous. Martinez's squad automatic weapon engaged the advancing fighters with sustained bursts of accurate fire, but the volume of targets was overwhelming for two weapons, no matter how accurately employed. Sarah realized that their small team was facing odds that bordered on impossible.
"We need to displace," Martinez called out during a brief lull in the firing. "They're starting to flank our position."
Sarah agreed, but she wanted to eliminate one more critical target before abandoning their position. Through her scope, she had identified what appeared to be the overall assault commander, an insurgent who was coordinating the multiple attack columns with radio communications and hand signals. The target was approximately 400 meters away, at the extreme edge of effective pistol range and moving constantly between covered positions. But eliminating him could disrupt the coordination between assault columns and potentially save the entire base. Sarah waited patiently, tracking the target's movement pattern and identifying the moment when he would be most vulnerable. When the enemy commander paused to observe the base through binoculars, she took the shot that would define her military career. The bullet crossed 400 meters of mountain air with perfect trajectory, striking the target and immediately creating visible confusion among the assault columns. Without central coordination, the multiple attacks began to lose their synchronized timing, creating opportunities for the base defenders to concentrate their firepower more effectively.
"Outstanding shot," Johnson exclaimed as he observed the results through his own optics.
"The whole assault is losing coordination." But Sarah's exceptional shooting had also revealed their position to enemy forces who were now directing concentrated fire toward their hide.
Bullets sparked off the rocks around them as automatic weapons fire swept their position from multiple directions.
"Time to go," Sarah announced, beginning the tactical withdrawal that would take them back toward friendly lines. The movement to their secondary position required crossing exposed terrain while under fire from multiple enemy positions. Sarah's team used cover and concealment effectively, but they were clearly outgunned and outnumbered by the forces arrayed against them. From their new position, Sarah could observe the results of her precision shooting on the enemy assault. The loss of the overall commander and multiple key personnel had created a gap in leadership that was affecting the enemy's combat effectiveness. The assault columns were advancing, but their coordination was poor and their use of supporting fires was ineffective. Sarah continued engaging high-value targets as they presented themselves, making each shot count in the desperate defense of the base. Her eighth shot eliminated a fighter who was attempting to reorganize one of the assault columns. Her ninth shot struck an insurgent who was carrying demolition charges toward the base perimeter. The base's defensive fires were now fully engaged, with machine guns, mortars, and individual riflemen contributing to a volume of fire that was taking a devastating toll on the attacking force. But the enemy continued their advance with the determination of fighters who understood that retreat meant certain defeat. Sarah's 10th shot of the engagement eliminated an enemy fighter who was attempting to breach the base perimeter with cutting tools. Her 11th shot struck a mortar gunner who had finally managed to establish his position and was preparing to fire on the base's command post. By this point in the engagement, Sarah had been shooting for over an hour under the most stressful conditions imaginable. Her hands remained steady, her breathing controlled, and her mental calculations precise despite the chaos surrounding her position. The enemy assault reached its climax as surviving fighters made a final desperate rush toward the base perimeter. Sarah's team added their firepower to the devastating defensive fire that met this last attack, with Martinez's squad automatic weapon sweeping the approaching targets while Sarah engaged individual fighters with surgical precision. Her 12th shot eliminated the last identifiable enemy leader. Her 13th shot struck a fighter who was attempting to throw grenades over the base perimeter. Her 14th shot ended the threat from an insurgent who had actually managed to breach the outer wire before being stopped just meters from the main defensive positions. When the firing finally stopped, the silence was almost overwhelming after hours of sustained combat. Sarah's team had survived the engagement, but barely. They had expended most of their ammunition, and Johnson had been wounded by shell fragments during the final assault. The base perimeter was littered with enemy casualties, evidence of the devastating effectiveness of coordinated defensive fires. But Sarah's precision shooting had been the key factor in disrupting the enemy's coordination and eliminating the leadership that could have made their numerical superiority decisive.
Captain Rodriguez found Sarah as she was treating Johnson's wounds with supplies from their medical kit. "Mitchell, I need a preliminary count. How many confirmed targets did you eliminate during the engagement?"
Sarah thought for a moment, reviewing each shot in her mind.
14 confirmed, sir. All at ranges between 200 and 400 meters. Rodriguez shook his head in amazement.
14 targets with a pistol at those ranges, under combat conditions.
That's beyond what most people would consider possible. As the base conducted its post-engagement assessment, the full scope of Sarah's contribution became clear.
Her precision shooting had eliminated key enemy personnel at critical moments, disrupting their assault plan and preventing the coordinated attack that could have overrun the base's defenses. The enemy had achieved nothing beyond proving that determined defenders with superior training and equipment could defeat even overwhelming numerical odds when properly positioned and employed. More importantly for Sarah, she had proven to herself that the lessons her father had taught her in the Colorado mountains could be applied successfully in the most demanding circumstances imaginable. 3 weeks later, Sarah received orders transferring her back to the United States for advanced training and a new assignment. The Army had recognized her exceptional abilities and wanted to develop them further through specialized schools and courses. As her helicopter lifted off from Forward Operating Base Phoenix for the last time, Sarah looked down at the mountains where she had proven herself under fire. The precision that had begun with shooting cans off fence posts had evolved into a capability that could influence the outcome of battles and save the lives of fellow soldiers. Her father's final words echoed in her mind: "Every shot matters. Make them count." In the mountains of Afghanistan, facing enemies who had forced her to fight with her secondary weapon, Sarah Mitchell had made every shot count with precision that would be remembered and studied for years to come. The enemy had indeed made her lower the M9 from her preferred fighting position, but her precision had made them pay dearly for every step they took toward their objectives. 14 enemy fighters had learned too late that underestimating the skills of a determined American soldier was a fatal mistake in the unforgiving mountains where every shot echoed with the authority of perfect marksmanship.